I want to tell you a story about how a phone screen turned away from me at the right moment, showed me something I had spent 19 years pretending not to see. It started at a barbecue in my own backyard, and it ended with a conversation I had with a lawyer on a Monday morning while my stepson was still sleeping off his celebration in a hotel 2 miles away. But before I get into all of that, tell me in the comments where you're watching or listening from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday before Labor Day, and I was standing at my grill the way I always stand at my grill. Tongs in one hand, a bottle of Shiner Bock sweating in the other, smoke rolling up into the live oak branches over the back patio. I'd been up since 7 that morning. I'd driven to 3 different stores, the H-E-B on William Cannon for the ribs, the Mexican market on South First for the jalapenos because my stepson Derek only likes a certain kind, the Home Depot for a new propane tank because I checked the old one the night before and didn't want to risk it. I didn't tell anybody about any of that. That's not the kind of thing you announce. You just do it because it's a celebration and you want it right. Derek had just made partner at his firm. 34 years old, sharp as a tack, practiced real estate law in Austin, Texas. And I was proud of him. I want to be clear about that because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about a man who stopped being proud. It's a story about a man who finally started being honest. Let me go back. I met his mother, Carol, in the spring of 2005. I was 43 years old, working as a senior project manager for a civil engineering firm in Austin. Yes, she was 41, recently divorced, raising 2 boys mostly on her own. Derek was 15. His younger brother, Ryan, was 11. Their father, a man named Glenn Hutchins, had moved to Phoenix the year before. He called on birthdays when he remembered. He paid child support for about 8 months, and then his lawyer got involved and the number went down and then the payments got irregular. And then Carol stopped fighting it because fighting cost money she didn't have. I knew all this before I proposed. I knew it and I said yes anyway, not because I was naive, because I thought love was the same thing as commitment and I was the kind of man who meant both. We married in November of 2006 at a small ceremony at Barton Springs Pavilion. Carol wore ivory. The boys wore clip-on ties and kept pulling at the collars. Ryan fell asleep during the reception with his head on my shoulder, and I thought, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. I moved us out of Carol's rental on Runberg Lane and into the house I'd been paying on for 4 years over in the Circle C neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a backyard big enough to throw a proper party. That house was in my name and my name only. My father, a man who spent 30 years as an electrician in Beaumont and never once had less than 2 jobs, sat me down before the wedding and said, "Son, keep your name on what you build. Love is real. Paperwork is also real. Don't confuse the two." Carol never asked about the deed. I took that as trust. Maybe it was something else. I didn't examine it close enough at the time. I stepped in where Glenn had stepped out. I drove Derek to his soccer practice 3 evenings a week at the fields off Slaughter Lane. I sat in aluminum bleachers in October heat and October cold, and clapped for a kid who sometimes acknowledged me with a nod and sometimes didn't. Ryan was easier. Ryan was 11 and still needed things and didn't have the pride yet to pretend he didn't. But Derek was 15, and 15 is a wall you have to be patient enough to walk around. I was patient. I paid for Derek's SAT prep course the summer before junior year. I sat at the kitchen table with him 2 nights a week, going over practice tests. He was stubborn. The way smart people are stubborn, meaning he knew he was right even when he wasn't, and it took him a while to trust that I was trying to help and not show off. But we got there. He pulled a 1340 his second attempt. He pumped his fist in the kitchen when the scores came in online, and I said, "I told you," and he almost smiled. Almost. He got into UT Austin. Partial academic scholarship. The rest was me. Tuition, housing, the meal plan, the laptop, the study abroad program in Madrid. His junior year because Carol said it would look good for law school applications, and I agreed. I wrote that check without blinking. That was $19,000, including the flight. I don't say that to keep score. I say it because the numbers are part of the truth. And the truth is what I'm here to tell. Law school at Texas. 3 years. I covered the gap between his loans and what he actually needed to live like a human being rather than a monk. The apartment on Dean Keaton Street, the bar prep course, the suit he wore to his first interview. I paid for his wedding too, or most of it, when he married a woman named Priya in 2019. I walked him down to the altar before her father did because Carol asked me to, and I said yes, because that's what I did. I said yes. I was the one who was there. Glenn showed up to the wedding. I knew he would. He'd been making a modest comeback in the boys' lives since Derek finished law school, which I always found interesting timing. He flew in from Scottsdale, where he'd relocated after Phoenix didn't work out. He had a tan and a sports coat, and the easy confidence of a man who has never had to wonder whether he was welcome. He hugged Derek at the reception like they talked every week. He didn't look at me once. I didn't say anything. I shook his hand at the cocktail hour, and he said, "Thanks for looking after my boys, the way you'd thank a neighbor for watering your plants." I said, "Of course." And I let go. That was 6 years ago. I told myself it didn't bother me. I was good at telling myself things. Back to the Saturday before Labor Day. I'd been grilling for 2 hours when Carol came outside with her phone tilted away from me, which is a thing she'd been doing for a couple of months by then, and which I had been cataloging quietly the way you catalog small weather changes before a storm. She topped off her wine, stood near the rose bushes I'd planted along the fence line, and laughed at something on the screen. Then she looked up, saw me watching, and put the phone in her pocket. Derek and Priya arrived around 4. Ryan came with his girlfriend, a school teacher from Pluggerville named Becca, who brought a pan of brownies and immediately started helping in the kitchen, which made me like her immediately. The yard filled up with Carol's co-workers and our neighbors and a couple of Derek's friends from the firm. Somebody put music on the Bluetooth speaker. Kids ran through the sprinkler I'd set up near the back fence for my neighbor's grandchildren. It was a good party. I want you to understand that. It was genuinely a good afternoon. Around 6 o'clock, Derek came and stood next to me at the grill. He had his sleeves rolled up and a beer in his hand, and he looked like a man who'd arrived somewhere he'd been working toward for a long time. I was glad for him. I am still glad for him. That part is not complicated. He said, "Hey, I wanted to let you know, Dad's flying in next weekend." I turned the ribs. I kept my voice easy. "Glenn? Yeah. He wants to take me and Ryan out for a proper celebration. Just the 3 of us, kind of a family thing." I nodded. I said, "That sounds nice." He said, "You get it, right? It's just, he wasn't around for a lot of it, and I think he wants to do something to mark it." I said, "I get it. I meant it, partly." I understood the words. What I was less sure I understood was why Derek was telling me this in the tone you use when you're asking for permission rather than sharing news. Like he already knew something didn't sit right about it, but he decided to say it this way and see if I'd let it go. I let it go. But I heard it. I filed it in the same place I'd been filing things for a while. The way Carol angled her phone. The way Glenn showed up at important moments with the timing of a man who'd been briefed. The way Derek, 2 years ago at Christmas, introduced me to one of his law school friends as his mom's husband rather than his stepfather, which is a small distinction, but not a small thing. That night, after everyone had gone home and Carol was asleep, I sat on the back patio alone. The girl was cold. The string lights were still on. The yard had that particular quiet that comes after a crowd leaves, like the air is still surprised by the silence. I drank a glass of water and looked at the live oak tree I'd planted the year we moved in. It was 40 feet tall now. Took 19 years to get there. I thought about a lot of things sitting in that chair. I didn't sleep much. By 6 in the morning, I was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the yellow legal pad and a pen that had been in the junk drawer since 2018. I made a list. Not an angry list. A clear one. The kind of list you make when you stopped lying to yourself and started doing arithmetic. The first thing I did was call my financial advisor. a man named Harold Epps who worked out of a small office on Research Boulevard and who I'd trusted with my retirement accounts for 11 years. I told him I wanted to restructure my estate plan. He asked if everything was okay. I said everything was very clear, which is not the same thing, but close enough. We met that Tuesday. The second thing I did was call a real estate attorney. Not to sell the house, not yet, but to understand exactly what I owned and what I didn't and what Carol's claim would be if things changed. I had bought the house before the marriage. My name had stayed on the deed alone, the way my father told me. Texas law was going to be on my side of this table if it came to that. I wanted to know the room before I decided whether to sit down in it. The third thing I did was pull up the spreadsheet I'd been keeping since 2007. Every major expense. Tuition payments sorted by semester. Bar prep. The Madrid trip itemized. The wedding costs. Ryan's truck when his transmission blew out in 2017 and he didn't have the money and didn't ask Glenn, because Glenn wasn't the kind of man you asked. 19 years of columns. The total, at the bottom of that spreadsheet, was a number I'm not going to say out loud, because it doesn't matter what the number was. What matters is that it existed, and I was the only one who knew it existed. Carol noticed I was quiet. She said so on Wednesday evening when she came home from work and found me reading at the kitchen table instead of watching the evening news like I usually do. "You're quiet," she said. "Long week," I said. She kissed me on top of the head and went to pour herself a glass of wine. I watched her stand at the counter with her back to me and her phone in her hand, and I thought, I have loved this woman for 19 years. I thought, I have meant every single thing I did. And I thought, meaning something does not guarantee it will be received the way you meant it. That is the part they don't tell you. Glenn came the following Friday. I was not invited to dinner. Carol told me on Thursday evening, almost as an aside, that Derek and Ryan were taking Glenn out to Uchi on South Lamar, the good Japanese restaurant downtown, to celebrate, and she was going too since it was a family occasion. She said it the way you say something you've already decided is fine before you've said it out loud. She said, "You understand, right? You know how important this is to Derek." I said, "I understand." She said, "I knew you would. You've always been so good about this." I thought about what it meant to be good about something, whether it was a compliment or a description of usefulness, whether there was a difference. She left at 7. I sat in the house alone. I made myself a sandwich. I ate it standing at the counter because sitting at that kitchen table felt like sitting in a room that had quietly decided it didn't belong to me anymore. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it back in the cabinet. I thought about Derek at 15, sullen, walled off, pulling at his collar at our wedding. I thought about him at 17, pumping his fist over a test score. I thought about the Madrid photos he sent me from a plaza I couldn't pronounce. I thought about walking him down an aisle and shaking his hand at the bottom and him saying, "Thank you, Marvin." Just that. Simple and real and enough at the time. I thought about Glenn stepping off a plane with a tan and a sports coat and getting the celebration dinner I had spent 19 years earning. I didn't feel angry, or I did, but underneath the anger was something quieter and heavier. The feeling of a man who has finally looked directly at a thing he'd been looking slightly past for a very long time. I stayed up until midnight. I did not throw anything. I did not call anyone. I sat in the good chair in the living room, the leather one near the window that looks out on the front yard, and I let the feeling settle into something solid and still, into something that knew what it was going to do. Harold Epps and I met again on Monday. I restructured my will. The house, which was mine, would go to my sister in Beaumont in the event of my death, not to Carol. The investment accounts, same. I named my nephew as a secondary beneficiary. I didn't do this out of cruelty. I did it because I had spent 19 years building things, and I wanted to be clear, at least to myself, about what was mine and what was not. Love is real. Paperwork is also real. My father was right about that. I didn't tell Carol. Not immediately. I needed to think about what I was actually deciding, whether I was restructuring an estate plan or restructuring a life. Those are different decisions and they require different mornings. What settled it was a conversation I didn't mean to have. 3 weeks after the Uchi dinner, I ran into Derek at the Central Market on North Lamar on a Sunday afternoon. He was buying wine. I was buying coffee beans. We stood in the aisle and talked for a few minutes, the way you do when you see someone you know well but aren't sure how to stand next to anymore. He asked about my golf game. I asked about the firm. Then he said, "Hey, Dad wants to come down for Thanksgiving this year." Carol already said it's fine. He kind of laughed when he said it. A little apologetic, a little hopeful. I looked at him. He was 34 years old, smart, kind in his way. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and 19 years of my money and his education. And I did not resent him for any of it. What I resented was the assumption. The way my house, my kitchen, my holiday had become the venue for something I hadn't been asked about. The way fine had been decided for me before anyone thought to ask. I said, "Derek, when did your father start coming to Thanksgiving?" He shifted his weight. He said, it's been a couple years, Marvin. You've been there. It's been fine." I said, "I wasn't there the last 2 years. I was at my sister's in Beaumont." He looked at me like I'd said something in a language he didn't know I spoke. I said, "I think you should know something. I paid for your SAT prep, your undergrad, your law school living expenses, your bar exam, your Madrid trip, your wedding. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad. I'm saying it so you understand that when I ask a question about what happens in my house, it's not a small question." He didn't say anything right away. He looked at the wine bottle in his hand. I said, "I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm trying to be honest with you for the first time in a long time, which means I'm also being honest with myself." The aisle was quiet. Someone rolled a cart past the end of it and the wheels squeaked on the floor. He said, "I didn't think about it that way." "I know," I said. "That's part of what I'm telling you." I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while. The engine made that ticking sound. Engines make when they're cooling. The neighborhood was calm. A dog barked twice down the block and stopped. I looked at the house, the one I'd bought in 2001, the one I'd painted twice and re-roofed once, and added a deck to in 2014, the one that had held 4 people and a marriage and 19 years of trying. I went inside and told Carol I needed us to talk. We sat at the kitchen table. I told her what I'd changed in my estate plan. I told her about the conversation with Derek. I told her about the Sunday evenings I'd spent watching her angle her phone away from me and deciding not to ask because I thought being easy was the same thing as being strong. I told her about the night of the Uchi dinner and the sandwich I ate standing up at the counter and what that felt like. I told her all of it in a voice that was calm and flat and careful the way a voice gets when it has decided the time for performance is over. She cried. She said she hadn't meant for any of it to feel this way. She said Glenn was their father and it was complicated and she was trying to be fair to everyone. She said she thought I understood. I said, I did understand. That was never the problem. The problem is that understanding was all you ever asked of me. You never asked how it felt. You never asked what I needed. You asked me to understand and I did for 19 years and I became invisible while I was doing it. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, really. But the truth doesn't always come with an answer. Sometimes it just comes, and you have to decide what to do with it, standing there in your own kitchen, holding a truth that's been waiting in a drawer for almost 2 decades. We separated in October. I want to be straightforward about that because I don't have any interest in making it sound more or less than what it was. It was a marriage that had stopped being honest, and an honest separation is better than a dishonest continuation. Carol moved into an apartment in South Austin near Ryan. We divided what was divisible. The house stayed mine. The court agreed. I hear Glenn didn't come for Thanksgiving after all. Something came up in Scottsdale. I heard that from my neighbor, who heard it from Carol, who didn't call me to tell me herself. I didn't feel satisfied when I heard it. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something I can only describe as clear, the same feeling I'd had in the driveway that evening looking at my house, like a window somebody finally opened. I've been living alone in Circle C for 7 months now. I've gotten used to the quiet. I'm still learning the difference between quiet that's absence and quiet that's choice. Most mornings I make coffee on the back patio and watch the birds at the feeder I put up last spring. A pair of cardinals comes most days, the same two I think, though I can't be certain. The red one lands first, the other follows a minute later. I like the predictability of it. Ryan called me 2 months after the separation. He said he wanted to get lunch. I said yes, and I meant it without reservation because Ryan and I had always been easier with each other. He'd been the 11-year-old who fell asleep on my shoulder and never learned how to pretend otherwise. Over tacos at a place on South Congress, he said, "I want you to know I see it. All of it. I always did. That one hit me somewhere I hadn't expected. Not behind the ribs like I would have thought. Lower than that. Deeper. The place where things settle when they finally get said." I didn't cry. I'm 62 years old and I've learned that tears and weight are different things. I thanked him. We ate our tacos and talked about his job and Becca and the fact that they were thinking about buying a house in Pflugerville. And he asked me if I'd look at the inspection report when the time came because he trusted my eye. I said I would. I went home and sat in the good chair, the leather one by the window. Outside, the live oak tree I planted in 2006 stood 40 feet over the front yard, thick and settled and entirely certain of where it was. I looked at it for a long time. A man named Clifford Hayes comes to my church on Sunday mornings. He's 79, retired iron worker, hands like they were carved out of something harder than wood. He sits in the fourth pew from the back, and he always gets there before everyone else, and he always stays until the room is empty. I started sitting near him because he doesn't feel the need to fill silence with words, which is a quality I've come to appreciate enormously. One Sunday in November, he looked at me and said, "You look like you set something down that was too heavy for one person." I said, "I think I did." He nodded. He said, "Took me till I was 65 to set mine down. You're doing better than I did." I laughed. It was a real laugh, which I've been measuring since the separation because real ones are rarer and worth counting. Derek texted me in December. He said he wanted to talk when I was ready. I looked at the message for a long time. I thought about him at 15, pulling at his collar. At 17, pumping his fist. At 22, sending me photos from a plaza in Madrid. At 34, standing in a grocery aisle, holding a wine bottle while his stepfather told him the truth. I wrote back, "When you're ready to listen too." We met for coffee on a Saturday morning at a place on South Congress. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He told me Glenn had stopped returning his calls regularly again. He said it with the flat voice of someone reporting weather, like he'd made peace with the fact that some things were going to keep being what they'd always been, no matter how much you wanted them to change. I didn't say I told you so. I've got no use for that sentence. He told me he'd been thinking about the grocery store conversation since the day it happened. He said, "I think I knew Marvin. On some level, I think I knew how much you did, and I let Mom frame it as just, what husbands do. And I let myself believe that because it was easier. I told him I understood, and I did, truly, because I'd done the same thing in reverse for 19 years. I'd let myself believe that doing the work was enough, that love didn't need to be spoken to be real, that silence and patience were the same thing as security. Neither of us was entirely right. He didn't apologize exactly. He got close. He said, "I should have said something at the barbecue. When I told you about the dinner, I should have said, 'Marvin, you're coming too.' And I didn't. And I've thought about that a lot." That landed. I let it land. "Apologies don't rewrite the past," I said, "but they're a door. Depends on whether we want to walk through it." He nodded. We drank our coffee. He asked about the cardinals, and I told him about the feeder. And he said his grandmother used to have one in her backyard in San Antonio, and he'd forgotten about that until just now. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a beginning of a beginning, which is the most honest thing two people can offer each other when they've been dishonest for a long time. I drove home on a Saturday morning in January with the windows down even though it was 52 degrees, because Texas winter is a mild and gentle thing if you're willing to accept it on its own terms. I pulled into the driveway of my house and sat there for a minute, the way I've been sitting in driveways lately, taking stock. I thought about what I'd spent 19 years doing and what I'd gotten for it and what I would change and what I wouldn't. And the honest answer is not what I expected. I wouldn't undo Derek at 17 pumping his fist. I wouldn't undo Ryan falling asleep on my shoulder. I wouldn't undo the deck I built in 2014, or the live oak tree in the front yard, or the cardinal feeder that brings the same 2 birds every morning. Those things are mine. They happened and they're real and no one can restructure them. What I would undo was the silence. The part where I confused endurance with love. The part where I made myself small so everyone else had enough room and then was surprised when they stopped seeing me. If you have ever been the one writing the checks while someone else got the credit, if you have ever sat down when they told you to sit down because you didn't want to cause a scene, if you have ever been thanked with the word understand when what you actually needed was to be seen, I hope something in this story reaches the place where you keep things you haven't said yet. You're not required to keep holding what nobody acknowledges you're carrying. You're allowed to set it down. You're allowed to change your paperwork, change your plans, change your seat. You are allowed to stop being invisible in your own life. That's what it took me 61 years and 19 years of marriage and 1 Labor Day barbecue to learn. And some mornings, sitting on my back patio with my coffee while the Cardinals figure out the feeder, I think, not bad at all. Thank you for being here. If this reached you today, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear something like this, send it to them. That's why I'm here. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Uncle Marvin. I'll be back soon with another story worth telling. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way. Just the plain, ordinary version of it. The version where you look back at 19 years and trace the line between what you allowed and what eventually happened because you allowed it. I allowed Carol to decide what the word family meant in my own house. I allowed Derek to grow up understanding, on some level, that my role was functional rather than fundamental. I allowed Glenn to walk into celebrations I had built and paid for and stand in the center of them like a man who'd earned the floor. And every time I allowed it, I told myself that was the mature thing, the steady thing, the thing a good man does. What I know now is that there's a difference between being steady and being invisible. I confused them for a long time. Steadiness is strength. Invisibility is just disappearing slowly while telling yourself you're being strong. The morning I sat down at that kitchen table, with a legal pad and a pen from the junk drawer, something had changed in me that I can't fully explain except to say it felt like clarity. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity, the kind that comes when you stop negotiating with yourself and start being honest about what you actually see. What I saw was this. Derek was a good man in part because of what I gave him. The SAT prep, the tuition, the late nights at the kitchen table, the check for Madrid, the suit for his first interview. Those things shaped him, and he knew it, somewhere underneath the easier story his mother had framed for him. He knew it the moment I said it out loud in that grocery aisle, and he went quiet the way people go quiet when the truth lands on something they've been protecting. That moment cost me something to do. It would have been easier to buy the wine, say goodbye, and drive home. Easier and emptier. What I've learned about hard conversations is that they don't get easier if you delay them. They just get heavier. And eventually you're carrying so much unspoken weight that you can't stand up straight in your own life. Ryan knew all along. That still gets me. He was 11 years old when I came into his life, and he never stopped seeing me the way an 11-year-old sees the person who shows up, clearly, without the complicated architecture adults build around their feelings. He saw what I did, and he held on to it quietly for years, and when he finally said, "I see it, all of it," I always did. I understood what it means to be witnessed. Not thanked, not rewarded. Witnessed, not thanked, not rewarded. Witnessed. That's the thing that matters. What happened to Glenn is just cause and effect working the way it always works. A man who shows up only for the moments that serve him will eventually run out of moments. Derek is smart enough to see that now. It took losing the comfortable version of the story, but it got there. Intelligence isn't just what you know. It's what you're willing to look at directly when looking is uncomfortable. And me. I built a house, a family, a life. I lost the version of it I thought I had. What I kept was cleaner and truer and mine in a way nothing had been for a long time. The Cardinals come every morning. Ryan asks my opinion on inspection reports. Clifford Hayes says I'm doing better than he did. And Clifford is a man whose opinion I trust. That's enough. Some mornings, sitting out back with my coffee while the yard wakes up slow, I think that's more than enough.